For those who don't know me yet, I am Jen Thompson, the CEO of the Australian Gas Industry Trust. We've had a little bit of a short hiatus away from the Lunchbox sessions, but I welcome you to this one, the fourth one for the year. Today's speakers are four of the gas industry's rising stars. These young people were successful in receiving an AGIT Scholarship to attend the APPEA conference in Brisbane in May this year. They are here today to share some of their learnings on the latest industry themes, trends and information. First up, we will have Dale Firewood, Senior Mechanical Engineer who sits in Darwin with GHD. Next, we have Banita Pavchevich from GPA Engineering here in Brisbane. Then we will have a short presentation by Talon Energy's Sky Sadler. Unfortunately, Sky only got to attend the opening event and the first day before coming down with COVID and having to isolate in Brisbane for the next five days or 7 days. And then lastly, we will have Drew Malik, Senior Project Manager from Worley in Brisbane. I just have to do a little bit of housekeeping before I hand it over to the guys. Our next industry conference is the APPEA conference in September in Brisbane. AGIT currently has some scholarships available if anybody's interested, or if you know of anybody. They close this Friday. Talking about the APPEA conference, we also have 4 scholarship holders who attended the World Gas Conference in Korea in May, presenting their learnings at the conference on Monday afternoon. A little bit more housekeeping. This session is being recorded and will be put up on the AGIT YouTube channel, and there will be time for questions at the end of the 4 presentations. Last but not least, our next Lunchbox session will be the guys who wrote the ESG report. They're from KPMG. They did a report and a business guideline, and that is scheduled for Tuesday, the 13th of September. If you're interested in attending, or if you want copies of these reports, please just email me. So without further ado, Dale, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. I'll just bring up my slides. I think it's doing something. Has that come up yet, Jen?
Perfect.
Fantastic. Well, I guess thanks everyone for having me. I'm quite excited to be sharing with you all today my personal reflection from the conference. I'd like to start with Acknowledgement of Country. So acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I think that's quite various around the country, but for me, this is the Larrakia people up here in Darwin, also known as the saltwater people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So just to kick it off, a bit of an introduction for me, mechanical engineer, studied at the University of Queensland and finished up back in 2012. I work for GHD. Many of you would know GHD as a global consulting firm. My role with GHD is Team Leader Energy Northern Australia, so based up here in our Darwin office. And I guess just a bit about my career journey. So I started in Brisbane, went across to the UAE for a little bit for a project, and then moved back to Darwin. So I've sort of moved around to a few different places. And I guess my core areas of expertise where I've spent most of my professional career is power gen, energy storage, both conventional and increasingly of late alternative fuels such as hydrogen, and then water treatment to support those energy industries. So I thought I'd share my reflections from the conference across 2 main domains today. It was a great experience, and there were numerous sort of learnings and sort of key takeaways for me, but I think these are the main ones. The first is in the area of markets and regulations. So I guess just to start with, I've got some stats there. Most of those are from the plenary on day one, but I'm sure these are no surprise to those on the call. But as we know, 80% of the global primary energy demand is currently from fossil fuels. There's almost 1 billion people globally that are still without power, and that essentially that problem's only forecast to get bigger. We've got 2 billion population growth forecast by 2050. As we're seeing of late, significant gas price surges and quite a tight supply market. So that's the sort of market side of things. But then on the other side, the consumer sentiment. So as was sort of evidenced at the conference, but also sort of more broadly from the presentations within the session, there is still opposition to the gas industry, and this ranges from essentially the sort of grassroots activism that we sort of see the protesters at the conference, right through to some more sophisticated sort of state shareholder and financial opposition to projects that we're seeing. And as was noted in the energy leaders panel, there's even been calls for an end to fossil fuels, which is obviously quite an extreme position, especially noting that it's currently the bulk of our primary energy supply. I've got policy sort of with a question mark there. I think it's evident to me that there is a bit of a vacuum in that space, and certainly with the energy leaders panel, you can feel them yearning for a sort of a clear policy direction in this space that just isn't there at the moment, and it seems to be creating issues. So I guess for me, the takeaways, firstly, I guess reconciling the disparity between these two items. So the market behavior and the consumer sentiment I find it astounding, to be honest. And I think, to me, that there appears to be a significant disconnect between what the markets are doing and how we're using and buying energy at the moment, and sort of the sentiment within pockets of the public and consumers. So I think that's one key takeaway and issue. The second for me is it's quite obvious that I think that there needs to be some sort of targeted, stable and fair demand side policy, something that we can get in place to sort of essentially help us navigate this transition and provide sort of clear and consistent nudges and signals to not only producers, but I guess the whole industry in this space. The second sort of domain I'd like to reflect on is the sort of environmental and social imperatives. Now, I guess these are well established, and I guess it's sort of no secret that urgent action is needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to limit the effects of global warming. We have, however, seen our highest ever global greenhouse gas emissions on record in 2021. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. It's not all bad news, however. So most companies have net zero targets. So this is not only, we heard from a number of the producers at the conference, but it's not only the producers, but other players in the industry more broadly, and even outside the industry. It's not uncommon for companies to have net zero targets. And I guess the point there at the start of that black box is it's a little appreciated fact, I think, that the gas industry has a pivotal role to play in this transition, I guess, both as that current significant supplier of the primary energy, but also as a technical enabler of this transition. And in one of the sessions, they spoke about 4 key pillars of this transition. We've got them there. So CCUS, electrification, energy efficiencies, low carbon fuel. So in short, basically reduce the energy where you can, electrify if possible. If not possible, change to a low carbon fuel. And if that's not possible, capture and sequester or utilize the carbon. So pretty straightforward. 2 of these items, so CCUS and low carbon fuels, were touched on extensively in various plenaries and breakout sessions at the conference, and it's quite clear that these are proven and well established technologies. It's really now about deployment and implementation at scale, where we're no longer in the sort of the proving or experimental phase of these technologies. So essentially, we have a ready-made solution ready to go to work through this transition. There was, however, so in both the ministerial addresses and the energy leaders panel, there was a comment about the rise of misinformation and increasingly emotional rhetoric in this space. And it was stated that essentially technology no longer speaks for itself. So whilst we have these solutions ready to go, it's not necessarily enough to speak to the facts. We need to engage with people at a deeper level. And then it was observed that trust in the industry is eroding, and I think this is quite a concerning statement, because I guess if we don't have trust, how can we affect the change we need to make, and how can the industry play the role that it can and needs to play in this transition? So the question was posed actually in the energy leaders panel to how do you build trust, and how do you improve on this situation? There was sort of a range of different answers, but I don't think any were particularly strong from that panel. It's not something that I have a clear answer on either, but I think for me, there's a need to appeal to each other's values as humans. I think that's an important thing. So have a values-based discussion. And then in terms of how do you build that trust, I think it's actions that are aligned with those values, even when they're not necessarily in your best interest. So it's the same as, building trust as an individual, as it's building trust as an industry, I think. So my key takeaway from that, and probably something to leave with today, is, we know the problem, we know the solution, we have the capability to do it. Really the question is, how do we convince others and get the support we need? That's about it for me. Just, I guess, a couple of thanks. So thanks to the Australian Gas Industry Trust for this scholarship. It was a fantastic opportunity, and thanks for supporting the development of professionals in the industry. And then thanks to my employer GHD for encouraging and supporting this attendance. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Dal. Thanks a heaps. Thanks heaps. We will have questions afterwards. Next person, Barney.
So good afternoon, everyone. In the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to follow Dale here and start off by acknowledging traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. Also like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So for those who I've met before, I guess hello again. And for those who I haven't, it's a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Banita Pavchevich. I am a process engineer working for GPA Engineering. I graduated also from the University of Queensland at the end of 2019. So only been in industry for about 3 years now. Primarily worked in the oil and gas sector, but more recently I've been involved with some hydrogen generation and renewable projects as well. So yeah, as I said, although I've only been part of the workforce, I guess, for a short period of time, I've sort of already come to understand some of the importance that the oil and gas industry will play in the energy transition and achieving our decarbonisation goals. And I've heard a lot of the time, some of those key buzzwords, we want to look at green hydrogen and CCS and energy security. And I guess attending the APPEA conference really helped me understand some of the finer details with relation to those things. But one particular topic at the conference that I thought was really interesting, because it wasn't really something that I'd thought about before, came from one of the plenary sessions, which was about our workforce for the future. and that's sort of what I wanted to speak about today. So Nick Gamgasar of KPMG highlighted the three key themes with regard to the workplace for the future, and these were jobs and skills are changing, competition to attract talent is intensifying, and a new norm of work is emerging. So with theme one, jobs and skills are changing. Um, sorry, just had someone pop up on my screen trying to get into the. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so in terms of jobs and skills are changing. So they're changing in terms of green skills and the way humans are interacting with technology. And the demand for roles with green skills is expected to increase to 400,000 across the broader oil and gas industry in Australia by 2050. So the Vice Chancellor of University of Queensland, Deborah Terry, she spoke about how the university has adopted an emphasis on teaching undergraduates how to learn into the future, and really focusing on reskilling and upskilling as their careers progress. And this is also something that's, I guess, more pertinent for industry as well, because there was a statistic that was given out that reskilling instead of rehiring 150 people per year can save up to $4 million. So obviously super important to keep those on board instead of sort of hire and fire mentality, I guess. Um, and so, I thought it was super interesting listening to Deborah Terry specifically talk about how things such as the Masters of Petroleum Engineering is no longer offered at the University of Queensland because the demand for it just isn't there anymore. And she was really encouraging industry to sort of engage with universities to make sure that I guess the right education is there, and that the students understand what the oil and gas industry is doing. I think at times, almost similar to the mining sector, it can have a bit of a bad perception, especially with teenagers and people in high school and stuff like that. Um, the second theme and third theme, I think, can kind of talk about together. So competition to attract talent is intensifying, and a new norm of work is emerging. So I'd obviously heard of the Great Resignation, kind of a bit of a hot topic at times recently. But I thought that it was super interesting that 25%, the demand of oil and gas jobs decreased by 25% during the pandemic. And I guess, yeah, companies are now realizing that employees are more empowered than ever, and um, are looking to find more purposeful work and work with flexibility. Um, so there was another statistic there that millennials are expected to job hop every 1 to 3 years, and that the cost of replacing an employee costs around 6 to 9 months of their salary. So if an organization were to keep 50 people from leaving, it would save them approximately $3 million a year. Which again, I didn't really realize the economic kind of benefit there. So yeah, I think that a strong workforce is obviously needed to achieve our decarbonisation goals, and something that we should be super focused on. So how do we really overcome these issues of, people really wanting to make sure that they're working for someone that shares the same value as them, kind of going into the oil and gas industry. As I said, at times, I think students, especially like in high school, when they're sort of making these big decisions, and sort of thinking about what they want to do into the future, again, can have those sort of misconceptions. So one of the things was to implement a strategic workforce plan that will constantly look into the future with regards to skills and what needs to be done to source the right talent. Another is to share the stories of people in industry who are playing an integral part in the solution in front of these students. So kind of late primary, early high school times, and sort of make those industry leaders role models. Third thing was to engage with local communities to create excitement and enthusiasm with regard to industry. And then the fourth was to encourage industry to work in partnership with universities to develop and educate emerging talent who will be the center of the future workforce. So I guess where focusing on the future workforce sits in terms of like a level of importance for the energy transition, I guess is a bit debatable, especially when you compare it to, how do we I don't know, how do we solve the issue with, transporting hydrogen, or how do we get CCS more up and running? I'm not exactly sure where it would sit, kind of in that, we would call it like a power ranking sort of a thing. But the APPEA conference helped me realize that it is a part of that energy transition. It's sort of like a piece of the puzzle. And I think that the overall puzzle can't really be solved unless we have that piece as well. And that it sort of needs to be focused on a bit more. So yeah, I'd just like to close again also by thanking AGIT, thank you Jen, for this opportunity. Yeah, the scholarship was incredible. It was a really great opportunity for me. Never really been to one of these big conferences before, really any conference for that matter. It was a really great experience for me. I learned a lot, and yeah, look forward to being there in the future again. So thank you, everyone.
Nice. Thanks, Manu. Over to you, Sky.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, just as a sort of quick background on myself. So I'm from a little bit of a different background. I'm a chartered accountant with the majority of my sort of professional experience coming from public practice auditing. So, whilst we have engineers and oil and gas alumni here, I'm even newer to the space. And I suppose it's just as part of that sort of great resignation that you sort of mentioned, Barney, before. I made the jump across to commerce at the beginning of the year, and currently work as a financial accountant for Talent Energy. And so we're a WA-based junior explorer, interested in the Perth Basin, and sort of we're progressively working towards our sort of maiden gas resource through our JV partnership with Strike. Right now that the company plug's done, I suppose in terms of the conference itself, I was pretty excited as a sort of first year attendee at APPEA. As sort of Jen sort of foreshadowed before, as luck would have it, came down with COVID on day one and sort of missed most of the conference. Sort of notwithstanding, the sessions I did attend were sort of extremely thought-provoking, and I guess the first thing that sort of struck me, being, I suppose somewhat of a new entrant to the energy space, was just how much of the discussion was actually framed from a climate perspective. I mean, you expect to see the protesters outside, but I just didn't realize just how much it was actually sort of framed with that. No, we are thinking about this. And I think it sort of touches more on what sort of Dale was saying before about that sort of disconnect, and I suppose the role that sort of industry sort of plays to sort of upskill the public, and sort of make everybody sort of realize the sort of mutual interest that we all sort of have. Right, we're all sitting on the same planet. We all have an interest in getting the right solution. So that was the first thing that sort of struck me, right? And I suppose the first plenary I sort of attended, Positive Energy for a Changing World, that pretty much summed up my sort of APPEA experience. I thought the session gave, context to the wider macroeconomic and geopolitical conditions at present. Obviously touching on the ongoing war in Ukraine, continued supply chain pressures across the globe, as well as the sort of existential climate crisis. I found the panel discussion is all the more engaging under the backdrop of the sort of looming Australian federal election at the time. And I sort of echo Julie Bishop's sentiment at the time that sort of both the major parties were essentially at a political crossroads, right? Neither of them, seemingly offering large scale sort of visions for post-COVID Australia, particularly with energy policy. And I guess sort of hindsight sort of tells us young progressives in particular, sort of overhearing that sort of business as usual rhetoric. And it'll be interesting to see whether sort of Labor's rewiring the nation plan has that sort of desired effect of driving down sort of electricity prices and sort of boosting jobs. But what I actually really thought was really thought-provoking was sort of Meriden Verrill's speech from the Energy Leaders panel. I thought it gave a fantastic historical context over those structural shifts in global systems, particularly with superpowers, China and Russia, sort of advocating for greater agency in decision making, with globalization seemingly on the way out, and sort of a shift towards more sort of independence, with those two superpowers exercising their flex through military, as well as sort of energy impacts, which we're already seeing across Europe. Another thing that Dale sort of raised as well was sort of the rise of misinformation, and I feel like sort of coupled with sort of continued rise of populist leaders, and just rampant misinformation on social media, it kind of grows to that disconnect as well, and that sort of concern and mistrust in our institutions, our traditional systems, and that our governments have the sort of political will to combat that climate change whilst also providing energy security. It's a really sort of interesting dichotomy, so to speak. Sort of notwithstanding though, it was encouraging to hear the views from sort of big oil and gas hitters, Corey Judd from Chevron, Meg O'Neill, Woodside, Dylan Pugh, Exxon, particularly in terms of the investment in sort of CCUS, which was sort of touched on as well, but really to sort of further demonstrate that the potential of the technology solutions as both a disruptor and an enabler for decarbonisation and sort of creating that circular carbon economy. But I do echo Dale's sort of sentiments that the technology can't just speak for itself now. It's like how do we sort of apply it on such a grand scale with everybody sort of on board on the same plan? And this is the part that I think I suppose the industry as well as governments can sort of play in sort of streamlining their messaging. So at least in that sort of response, we have a sort of solidified, unified front about where we're sort of going, and I feel like that's sort of lacking on the political realm at this stage. More to the point, it's sort of important as consumers, particularly generations more sensitive to the climate discussion, as they seek lower carbon solutions, improving those strategies to tackle both scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are vital. It doesn't matter if you're a Chevron or if you're a junior explorer, it's the same framework, the same concept that you've sort of got to get yourself across. And I was sort of pleased to see at least the discussion from these leaders on the panel, particularly with their sort of ongoing commitments to positive ESG outcomes, which is one of the sort of key themes that I took away from my time at APPEA. So, sort of a financial reporting perspective, ESG reporting is fast becoming the new sort of buzz. And, as such, there's a sort of a significant opportunity to sort of improve that reporting of those non-financial metrics, which I thought was, an interesting sort of discussion to help sort of provide confidence to stakeholders, deliver on strategy, ESG commitments. And I sort of see this as a sort of important communicative space to connect with your existing and prospective shareholders, investors, and the like. Sort of the final session that I attended on the one day that I was there was the Australia's Future Energy Strategy with Martin Wilkes from Risk, talking to the sort of continued role of gas in Australia's energy mix. So one of the things that you hear all the time, and fair be it for me to sort of point out from people that aren't sort of as ingrained in the industry, is that we need to immediately switch to renewables, invest only in renewables, and that's the only way that we're going to get things done, and we're going to stop it all falling apart. And one of the things that sort of struck me about what sort of Martin was said and the sort of data that he presented was that if you take a look at the last sort of 30 years, both renewables and natural gas as a proportion of Australia's energy generation fuel mix have doubled. And so whilst, the end of the decade forecasts a larger sort of renewable output percentage, I suppose the more sort of pragmatic of us still see gas as playing that sort of important sort of role, not just in terms of bridging us to that sort of transition in the next stage, but also as a key sort of point to sort of keep a range of solutions on the table. I think, Meriden Varels actually said it best, for where there is energy security, there is national security. And so that sort of plays into that sort of greater political realm. And lastly, it was sort of it was pleasing to see a Perth Basin plug. So Simon Molyneux also talked to the impact of the new supply in the Perth Basin specifically, which itself sort of carries a combination of abundant, clean, low-cost gas, geothermal energy resources that can supply baseload green energy. And, as I sort of mentioned before, my company is working towards developing sort of wellering in the Perth Basin, and, sort of everything discussed in that session helps attest to the demand for clean, low-cost energy, which we're sort of hopefully in a position imminently to provide at the local level. So, I suppose in conclusion, the themes that I sort of saw were just, obviously the historical backdrop and the macroeconomics and sort of how we're sitting where we are now, where we're looking to go in the future in terms of our investment with the various sort of pillars, that Dale sort of mentioned, CCUS and all the like, and how that sort of impacts in how we communicate that to investors. Because again, at the end of the day, it comes down to how best can the industry position itself to sort of communicate with prospective shareholders and stakeholders, particularly when we all have an interest in getting the stuff across the line. And so that's where I think we can be better as an industry, and it's definitely something that governments can be better in their messaging as well. So in conclusion, a large reason I came to APPEA was to get a sort of increased technical acumen and understanding to help sort of aid me in my sort of role currently. And whilst my experience was sort of short and sweet, I feel like I've gained significant insight, much more than I had prior to attending the conference. And I hope that's going to carry me in sort of good stead moving forward. Lastly, the things I just wanted to highlight were probably the things that get glossed over because they're not the technical parts, right? They're intangibles. So the welcome reception, the networking, the stalls, sort of the opportunity to hear from a wide array of talented and sort of passionate individuals in the space. Those are all things that I was very keen to get around and sort of learn from some of the best, right? And sort of in conclusion, I'd just like to thank AGIT CEO Jen Thompson as well, who not only sort of facilitated my scholarship event registration and the like, but once I got knocked over from COVID, bless her, she put me up in her apartment to stay whilst I was isolating. So, absolute gem. As far as experiences go, could have been worse, and it definitely was awesome considering everything that sort of happened along the way. And I definitely recommend to any prospective people that would want to go to this event. Definitely go to it, and I'm hoping to be a future attendee moving forward. Thank you very much.
Guy, thank you ever so much. Last but not least, Drew.
Thanks, Jen. I'll just share my screen. Just let me know when you can see it. Okay. I just want to start with acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the elders past and present, to those who have passed before us, and to the members of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. I want to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people, the traditional custodians of the land where I'm presenting from today in Brisbane, CBD. Hi all. By means of a personal introduction, so I'm Drew Malik, Global Program Manager at Worley, looking after our distributed energy resources and energy storage team. The global role looks after our North America, APAC, and Europe and Middle East growth ambitions. The current focus with Worley is growing the DES or energy storage sector. So by means of degree, I have a Bachelor of Chemical Engineering at UQ and an MBA. And my career sectors that I've been involved in is the upstream gas development, Surat and Bowen Basin, with Arrow Energy in the past, and then downstream LNG with ConocoPhillips and Origin. I've been involved in the waste to energy sector, the energy vector, and that particular sector was hydrogen in Queensland, and then my current role in energy storage, microgrids, and electrification. So today I'll be talking about energy transition as described at APPEA 2022. So I guess as mentioned, firstly as a chemical engineer, this transition really excites me. But it's important to remember we've been here before, and this was kind of reiterated at the conference. So in the 1800s, we used to use coal to bring people out of poverty and improve their quality of life. Now the 2020s, and the transition as described at APPEA is partially centered around low emissions technology and the focus around what we can do to address climate change. Like before, this is a profound change, and while millions of people still don't have access to energy, like Dale alluded to, this transition will be focusing on providing that energy to a growing world, but still centered around sustainability where we can. As this transition begins, it's important to remember that, we are all involved, really, and the oil and gas industry is critical to help the world decarbonize, and and that sometimes gets lost. So I guess on the screen is the global greenhouse gas emissions by sector in 2020 from the IEA. One of the sectors that was discussed at length, really, at APPEA is what the industry is doing to reduce fugitive and waste emissions, which you can see on the screen account for about 9%. The industry is really focused on initially measuring those emissions and then understanding what can be done to reduce leaks. And as technology improves, what can be done is only getting better. There were also significant discussions at the various breakout rooms around what we can be doing to reducing flaring, and of gas, unless it's really safety critical. So I guess it's easy to just say and look at industry and let that responsibility lie on them. But as you can see on the screen, really transport and buildings make up more than 1/3 of those emissions. So for me, it's kind of the decisions that we take on a personal level are equally as important. When we are traveling for business or traveling personally, what can we do there? How many degrees below 23 do I really need the AC this summer? Or I kind of propose back to the business when we do travel for work, if we can use the points we accrue for our travel to offset the carbon credits that for that travel, and that's kind of something we're looking at. But I guess ultimately we're all part of the solution is what I wanted to highlight there. So as touching on, I think a few folks have mentioned this, but as we all already know, the primary energy sources today still well and truly come from oil and gas, and that isn't going to change for a very long time. As you can see, this is once again from the IEA, the renewables only make up a fraction of that primary energy source. So, sure, this was 2020 and it was a bit of a dip, but it'll probably they'll continue to grow since the pandemic recovery has begun. But it was at APPEA there was a discussion around that in the decades ahead, the role that gas will play will only increase. As gas is a great transition fuel. And I guess ultimately the fact of the matter is that the oil and gas industry is critical to other key sectors, which was really highlighted to me. And it's you know that it's a key input to other industries, but I think it was Cenex where they had a booth where they literally just showed all the different products of that booth. Well, the gas industry or oil industry was critical to for that building that booth. So it included things like fertilizer, building materials, critical minerals processing, polymers. They used to make the plastics at that booth, the very clothing fibers, or, of the cushions and so forth. And ultimately they pointed out, it's these chemicals are fundamental, to humanity's quest for progression. But so one of the key messages that really, really stuck with me was how, as an industry, we need to continue to demonstrate value. And I think sometimes that gets lost. So Ian Davies, as the APPEA 22 chair and CEO of Cenex, talked about the fact that the oil and gas industry is critical to the world as a provider of reliable, affordable, and secure energy. And that will continue even as renewables start to penetrate the market. And you can see the impact of reliability and affordability. When there's geopolitical events that happen. Obviously with the war in Ukraine, that was highlighted as well. So unfortunately, not everyone believes this. So you can probably see on the screen, shut down Scarborough Gas was protests in the past. Past APPEAs in Perth. So unfortunately, not everyone believes this, and the focus of our opponents, with their current activism, is on stopping fossil fuels projects, but ultimately that has no effect on consumer demand and no effect on emissions reduction. But like everyone knows in this virtual room, that the oil and gas industry, will continue to work with communities. But where I think we kind of fall short at times is, as an industry, we need to have a clearer narrative on the role we play on and the benefits our industry brings. And most commonly what's discussed is the financial benefit, and that's what the focus always seems to lie on. But I think specifically more focus needs to be around our industry's ability to deploy intellectual capital. We've got some of the smartest folks I know. Obviously financial capital is important. So, with the intellectual capital, you've got the human capital there. And then, what's probably underrepresented and underappreciated is our industry's ability to tap into a global supply chain and develop partnerships like no other industry. So you can, the power of those partnerships, when there's supply chain crunches like there are happening right now during COVID, that can really be, utilized to the fullest extent. And, we need to also market our industry a bit better. A few folks have already talked about this, but, in order to attract future generations, the skills we have in our industry are critical. For example, the safe operation of a complex facility is going to be the same whether it's an oil and gas plant or, to an extent, or to when it's a hydrogen or CCUS facility. Those skills are transferable, and we're going to need that talent going forward. Otherwise there's going to be a significant shortage. So we need to demonstrate the skills that we have are, transferable. And, we, as an industry, it's important to reflect on the benefits that we will provide as we move into the new segment of the market. And, that's what I see that currently being is really around, carbon capture and storage and blue hydrogen. And, we need to focus on that transferable skills. So I guess some of my so some of the industries of the future, really form my key takeaway, and I think that's it leads into APPEA's 22 theme, which is positive energy for a changing world. So I guess the changing world that I found fascinating was the importance around the involvement of hydrogen in its various colors, and there are many, and how it will be a key decarbonization enabler in many industrial sectors. I guess some characteristics that support hydrogen are its relatively high energy density and the fact that we can tap into most of the current gas infrastructure. Sure, there's going to be brownfield changes and retrofitting, but its ability to be a zero carbon vector if deployed using low carbon energy. And lastly, it has a pretty high TRL or technology readiness level. It's been used as a fuel source by NASA since the 60s, but there's still going to be significant challenges there going forward. And some of them were touched on, and a lot of them are centered around the commercial challenges are still prevalent. And the same challenges really will apply for carbon capture and use to an extent. This was also heavily discussed, as Dale mentioned at the start of the conference. But as shown at the very first slide that I presented, of this presentation, in the 1800s, that's we had that the last industrial transition, and the fact of the matter is, to this day we've spent 150 years to develop our energy sector, and right now, what we need to do is we need to change it all, to an extent in 30 years if we are really to meet the net zero 2050 commitments. So there's a lot of work there. And so for me, in order to meet these commitments, CCUS really needs to be progressed, through to maturity. I probably have some bias there because being a chemical engineer. But while always, we still need to keep an open mind and avoiding ideology, and avoiding technology roadblocks. But as it was mentioned at APPEA, it was highlighted that CCUS has been used by Exxon since the 70s, and that's the Australian Exxon chair mentioned that. And when one of the biggest projects in the world is right here at Gorgon, and sure, there are some, there's been challenges at startup, around what production volumes that they were going to actually be quoted for CCUS are much lower to what there was initially envisaged. But it's like any technology, it's it takes time to mature and develop. And the other takeaway for me was probably much smaller, and it probably leads into what I do, a bit more day to day now at Worley, and that's around focusing on companies, their own Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions as they look to decarbonize. And one of the ones that I found pretty, different was there was a company called Green Energy at the conference, and I found, that they were talking about, they work with companies that are at the edge of the power grid, and they typically use, diesel to really to power up their Jennies and for reliability, and as part of their spinning reserves. And what they've done, they're looking more to really hybrid grids, with combination of wind and solar, and fast response batteries, to decarbonize their sites. And that was quite different for me, coming a bit new into the sector. But I guess ultimately, it really was amazing to see the industry looking at the innovative solutions to address their climate change commitments. And it's APPEA is the biggest one here in Australia, so I think it's always fascinating to see all the companies lean in and what they're doing in this space. But a point that I guess I want to leave you all on is what really stuck with me, and I think it was Kevin Gallagher, CEO of Santos. He says, there's all this talk and rhetoric, but ultimately you need to know energy to transform energy, and I think that really drives it home. So ultimately there's no other industry that's best placed to really drive that energy transition like the oil and gas industry, and so we need to be on that front foot to really drive it to a close. So that's kind of the my last point that really resonated with me. And if there's only one thing you remember, I guess that's something that I'd like to leave you all on. So that's it from me today. I just wanted to thank Jen and AGIT for the scholarship to attend APPEA, and Wally for encouraging me to participate. And then you've just got the standard disclaimer there. That's it. Thanks, Jen.
Drew, thank you so much. And guys, thank you ever so much. That was super informative. It never ceases to amaze me how great our young people are in our industry, and just how knowledgeable you are and how open you are to sharing. So thank you ever so much. Can I just open up to the group? Are there any questions? Brian.
First of all, Jen, thanks very much for what you've done in organising all this. You've obviously gone completely over the top in terms of getting organised and even providing accommodation for people. So you've been wonderful. Thank you. Just a question for Dale. You need to know energy to transform energy. I think that was a great quote to end with. You said that we've done, you had your 1800 coal transformation before, so we've done it all before. My question is, how do we retain the knowledge and understanding and lessons and learning to be able to do this? And it's a constant source of frustration for me that we keep learning the same lessons again, even just a few years later. How do we retain our learning so that we can move it forward? I
think that was for me, Dale. So Drew.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right, Brian. Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think this is it's a pretty, it's a challenge really, and I think I'm not sure if it was Sky or Bain pointed out. I think universities are struggling to attract. For example, in petroleum engineering, the numbers are, they've gone down, and I think, and whereas the industry is, calling out for new talent. So I think, the focus really needs to, for me, really be on continuing to, show those cross-industry skills and the transferable skills, and really drive that message home. I know as part of Wally, whenever I get an opportunity, I try and give back and go to universities and careers fairs and really just show the transformation. Say I've been on, I've working at upstream gas design, wellhead design, right now, to working in electrification and distributed energy. So all those skills have kind of helped me get to where I am today. And both are equally important, but you can't just when people are always surprised, people screaming out for green, but when you do your full life cycle analysis costs of your you know, if we say even your phone, you know, there's a lot of energy that's gone into that. You know, it's in, you know, the protesters don't really see that, right? But so I think for me, it's really about driving that message home. We know this is all part of the solution, and that's kind of that ideology piece that they're trying to point it out to. I don't want just there to be roadblocks. So I think the better information there is, and the more we share and, you know, pass down to future generations, and you know, it's equally important. I know, you know, chemical engineering colleagues at work, you know, working at the refineries here in Lytton with Ampol, you know, they're always talking about, you know, how what better, you know, what techniques they can do for sulfur reduction and so forth, and, you know, improve the quality of fuel and pass that knowledge on, because my key point is, you know, it all adds up, you know, and it's not just as black and white. I guess if that maybe answered it, that's kind of my point.
That's some good points. It's great. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks, Ryan.
Any other questions?
I've got one, Jen. It's
Okay.
Alicia here from Energy Networks Australia. Just so the people on the call know, we had a session like this. AGIT hosted a session like this because we had a conference in March this year, earlier than APPEA's, and we had a session where the people who got scholarships to our event presented their findings and their, you know, insights. And one thing we're really trying to do is attract young people. And I guess I'm interested from an upcoming talent, and I'm interested in, from your experience of APPEA, do you feel there was a real focus on upcoming talent? I know that there's this scholarship, which is wonderful, and we had another organisation that offered scholarships for our event as well. But I'm just interested from an event perspective, do you feel that there was things tailored for you to enable you to network, or was there a specific focus on upcoming talent, I guess is my question.
I could take it. Okay, go, Ben.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say from my perspective. So, I'm the youngest of the group, and I hadn't had an experience before at one of these conferences. Maybe don't have the same network connections as other people in the oil and gas industry, or just in any engineering industry, I guess, as a whole. I found it not necessarily difficult. Like, there were definitely events there, and like times for networking, and that there was an opportunity there for it. But a lot of the people that I ran into were, you know, people that were still at university that had come to the conference, and so I
Okay.
spoke to them about it, and they said that they were struggling quite a lot as well, to sort of
To meet
break into,
people or to
yeah,
break into conversations?
to break into conversations. Like, everyone sort of already knew one another. Like, it
It's a
was
bit
already a
cliquey.
pretty not, yeah, clicky is a word that could be used. I would have said tight knit or something. A bit.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. But yeah, like, there's, you know, tight knit community. There's relationships there. Everyone's catching up. You know, from 2-3 years ago. You know, if there's COVID lockdown,
Yeah.
no one's been able to see one another.
Yeah.
So at
course.
times it was a bit difficult to sort of break into that.
Yeah.
I don't know though if that's you know, a reason
Would happen
behind that is
anywhere.
because there's been this layoff or not. But that was just my experience, and yeah,
Okay.
don't
For
know
a
if the
young
others
person.
felt the
Yeah.
same. Yeah,
Well, I guess if
Yeah.
other people know each other and they're, you know, catching up, it is hard to break in,
Yep,
isn't it?
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
I'd echo
It's good.
exactly.
It's good feedback. Yeah, it's good feedback, and something that we should keep in mind when we're organising these sort of conferences is to make sure we facilitate that process.
Yeah.
That, you know, it doesn't make it you just go and grab your friends and have a chat and a coffee, and you know.
So
Yeah.
one thing we've done and we are doing is have a specific networking function for everybody, but the focus is upcoming talent.
Yeah.
And we had a student poster competition where through the universities they entered, and we did the big presentation in the exhibition hall during this networking reception to try and focus on the upcoming talent, and, you know, have them all in one place at one time where we could, have people meet them and congratulate them and all that stuff.
That's what I would. Yeah, that's my recommendation, Alicia. I guess there was in the rooms, like upstairs, there were talks about upcoming talent, and, you know, there was an opportunity to network in like through
Like
discussion
a conference
up
session.
there. Yeah, but through a session only. But in the main hall, it was probably, you know, probably to Bain's point, it's, you know, if you have that industry connections, it was more folks already talking, you know, between each other. So I guess if there was a specific thing in the bigger hall where even just for one small session, I think that would be really valuable.
Okay, that's good.
Posters are good because they get groups that are not, they're groups that are interested in the poster rather than groups that are interested in each other, and so you end up with a conversation that's much more general.
Yeah,
that's
about the topic and not about catching up.
Exactly, and then you can start that process and people can break in.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thank
Folks,
you.
if there's no more
So
questions.
is there anything you would go? I was just going to say, is there anything you'd do differently in the way we organise these sort of scholarships to conferences or something? I mean, feed it back anyhow, because Jen's organising this regularly, or other organisations as well, and there's something that's worth thinking about. Why don't you do this, or provide more information, or I don't know.
Well, I suppose just a quick sort of touch point on that as well. Just obviously I sort of foreshadowed before, I'm not really from a oil and gas sort of background, so for me it was important to get a sort of concise, sort of well-rounded bit of information. I suppose just from the get-go, things that I suppose that are sort of glossed over. There are so many acronyms that are spoken in this industry. Even a cheat sheet. I'm serious, it sounds silly, but having like a quick sort of cheat sheet about, here we go, here's a list of all the terms that'll be sort of spoken at this, and something you get sort of prior. Not to sort of dumb down things to people.
No,
but
that's
like,
a good
so
idea.
for example, we talk about attracting talent and sort of retaining talent, and passing on those transferable skills. It could be a way to sort of facilitate that, where here you go, here's something in a layman's sort of terms. It kind of just breaks down that wall for people that are kind of semi-interested but might otherwise not be pushed into something because they sort of see a sort of knowledge barrier, and that could be intimidating, confronting, and that sort of withdraws from the discussion, which is exactly the opposite what we want to have, right?
It's like an acronym buster.
Yeah, absolutely, an acronym buster. Just so when you're sitting in some of these plenaries, you'll hear of things. I was constantly scripting on my phone. So what does it all actually mean? I like to think I got across quite a bit of it by the day. I'm just sort of mindful that other people might be intimidated.
That's a good idea.
I was going to say as well, just on the first night, there was like the welcome drinks or the welcome reception sort of thing. I think even if there was like an hour section before that, or something like a pre-dinner thing for I guess the younger people in industry, so people under 35 or people whatever kind of age bracket, or however you want to kind of segregate it, or if there was even like a separate networking event there. Like I know similar to Drew, like I go to a lot of these networking events for universities and stuff like that, and sometimes they sort of have a sort of like a speed networking type of style where every 10 to 15 minutes you kind of change around and you get a different company rep in front of you. So separating people into groups sort of thing, and kind of not forcing the mingling, but almost like just providing an opportunity to sort of separate from those from those groups that I guess already exist. I think something like that might be helpful. But
agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a good one.
Folks, I'm just mindful that we're a little bit over time. Unless there is something more urgent, are we okay to call it a day? Young men, you did a wonderful job. I can't thank you enough. It was such a pleasure to spend the time that I spent with you, even though it was short at the APPEA conference because I had to take off for the World Gas Conference. But honestly, it was just so nice to meet and work with you all. And I'm sure that we will stay in contact down the track. And we will all know each other a lot better at the next conference that we all attend. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks,
Take care,
Jen.
everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
guys. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody. Thank you.